People usually talk about a new Alien vs. Predator like it's some kind of event that's still coming. The logic goes like this. Disney announces the film, drops a poster, and sparks a massive argument on Reddit. I mean, yes, that's how they normally sell big crossovers, but here's the main idea of this video. What if AVP is never going to be announced? What if it already came out? Not just once, but 4 films, and you've already seen them. And right now, I am going to explain why I believe it's true. My take is this. What we are looking at may not be a build-up to some future event. It is the ongoing construction of a new shared universe stretched across several projects. I'm talking specifically about Prey, Alien Romulus, Alien Earth, and Predator Badlands. If you look at each project on its own, every single one has a perfect basement. Prey can be seen as a strong return of the Predator, after tons of failures. Alien Romulus is easy to read as a film trying to bring Alien back to the horror style of the early films while giving franchise fans references they want. Alien Earth can be accepted as a divisive series that takes too much freedom with the canon and focuses on corporations instead of the title monster. And Predator Badlands can be read as a Yautja story where the filmmakers just dropped in a few recognizable details from the common universe. And that's exactly the point where you should start feeling like the studio is rebuilding the foundation through retcons and additions. The first truly important retcon is about how the new film explains the nature of the xenomorph. Ridley Scott pushed his prequels too far into religious symbolism and creator-creation philosophy, leaving a pile of unanswered and unwanted questions, especially in Covenant, which was steering the franchise to the idea that the xenomorph's final form is tied to David's experiments. Yeah, I know the bonus materials explain that he was recreating the species rather than inventing it from scratch, but the theatrical cut was practically pushing you to believe that he created the first one. For a standalone film, that was fine. Not really, but let's leave it behind. But a shared universe where the Yautja hunt xenomorphs as ancient and dangerous prey sits badly alongside the idea that the main monster is some android's lab hobby. And so Alien Romulus shows the same black goo, but the pathogen no longer reads as the original source from which all that biological horror eventually grows. Rook describes it as a substance derived in reverse, extracted from Big Chap from the first film. And that means something very important. The xenomorph is once again older than the chain of experiments that tied it to David, and it feels like something ancient again. Romulus is more than a film that nods to familiar imagery, though yes, it absolutely does that too. The visual rhymes with alien and aliens, the handling of space and machinery and dread and body horror, the references to Prometheus, resurrection, and even alien isolation. All of that is why I love this film as much as I do, but at the exact same time, the film puts Alien in better shape for future universe expansion. It reinforces the themes of corporate greed, biomaterial as a resource to be exploited, mutation, and the violent appropriation of another's. The next important step is about the structure of the world itself. Alien Earth is the most noticeable one here. The series is also the one that confuses the audience because it touches one of the most contested zones in the franchise, the moment of first contact and the timeline of the universe itself. The original Alien worked because it felt like a collision with something truly unknown, and that was a huge part of what made it so memorable. So, any project that claims the corporations knew more and knew it earlier is automatically interfering with the most important part. And in Earth, that claim is stated outright. The ship Maginot, based on the series timeline, left to collect specimens around 2055 and did not return until 2120 after a 65-year voyage. That means the corporation was interested in xenomorphs and other aliens several decades before David and Covenant supposedly created the species' complete form. The series builds a field of corporate warfare, cities, a whole social structure. Weyland-Yutani exists as a merged entity at a point when, under the old Prometheus and Covenant chronology, Weyland and Yutani were still separate companies. At the same time, the series introduces the Species 37 designation, trying to retroactively explain how the company could know about the species' existence while officially preserving the element of the unknown for the Nostromo and the Android Ash. Worth noting that in this particular case, the retcon is actually stitching the timeline together and closing gaps rather than tearing things open, and it's also a retcon of the shared universe itself. 2120 becomes the first phase of the xenomorph threat to Earth, even though the old AVP films had already shown them on the planet. And then there is a recurring element that runs across several projects and becomes a visible thread connecting them. That element is Mother. In the franchise, Mother was originally a computer mainframe, a cold intelligence that connected the crew to the company's interests rather than to their own safety. The crew, after all, was expendable. That was one of the most important pieces of Alien's atmosphere, which is exactly why its gradual expansion across the new projects feels so deliberate. In Romulus, its role is already amplified within the story. Corporate interests matter more than entire colonies, and the computer is there to protect those interests. In Alien Earth, the necessity of that kind of artificial intelligence for corporations grows alongside the scale of the world itself, and then Mother shows up in Predator Badlands almost as a supporting character. The Corp is embedded in the conflicts, in the technological environment, and in the very logic of interest in alien biology. That makes sense because in the Alien franchise, the company always wanted the xenomorph as a perfect object for capture, study, and exploitation. In Badlands, that same overarching plan starts operating in relation to the Yautja and the attempt to capture one. We also learn the corporation has knowledge of numerous alien species, and from interview material, it is known that earlier the film had more direct references, including a xenomorph and a cryochamber with Naru, even if those elements did not make it into the final cut. The fact that the filmmakers were moving that close to an even tighter connection between the two worlds speaks for itself. At first, the Predator's reputation was restored through Prey, then Alien was reassembled into a proper horror-ready state through Romulus, then the world was expanded and reconfigured through Alien Earth. After that, in Badlands, the studio made its first direct attempt to connect the two universes and gauge audience reaction. And yep, based on the box office, it is clear that everyone liked what they saw. That is exactly why I think the new AVP already exists. It is just not labeled on a poster. It's now the ideology and direction of the franchises themselves. Sure, my theory has weak points. There is no official AVP announcement. Noah Hawley stated outright that there would be no Predators in Alien Earth, and in the first season there were none. The individual retcons could simply mean the studio is correcting Ridley Scott's attempt to drag the Alien universe down with him and undoing inconvenient story decisions. Fans of Prometheus and Covenant may well read this reassembly as their branch of the story being pushed into the background, which is inevitable. It really does get in the way of the plot, sorry about that. But those very contradictions are part of what makes all of this look like a real studio strategy. We've seen plenty of failed reboots and remakes, and suddenly even Hollywood is capable of learning because all of this is too careful for it not to be deliberate. And my main conclusion after all of this is exactly that. The audience has already seen the new AVP 4 times. They just haven't been looking at these projects as parts of one new cinematic universe. There will be no more of them on their own. All of these IPs are in the hands of one company, and there is no real reason to confuse the audience. It is simpler to pretend that certain facts were slightly distorted before and that certain others turned out to be the product of a diseased imagination. Thanks for watching. I'm Mocha, and I would love to read your comments and thoughts. Subscriptions are always welcome, and see you soon. Take care.